When children are brought into the world, it's understood that they had no say in the matter. The will and actions of their parents brought them about. Meanwhile, they simply went along for the ride into existence because there was no choice. Acknowledging these facts, it's obvious why parents have obligations for their children. Once a child is born, they have a legal responsibility to provide what's often referred to as the necessities of life. If they can't, then they must relinquish their child to someone who can. Parents evidently owe a great deal to their children, especially when they're young and unable to fend for themselves. But what about the children? Do they owe their parents anything? Respect, love, trust, or obedience? This question has piqued my interest for quite some time, and so have the implications. Today's discussion will explore whether children owe their parents anything in terms of respect, obedience, trust, gratitude, and other comparable elements. Situations that will be examined are when children are much younger, then as they eventually grow into teenagers and adults who can more or less take care of themselves. Another dimension concerns parents who fail to provide the necessities of life, or otherwise neglect to properly take care of their children. The implications of this circumstance will also be noted. Evidently, if someone says yes to the aforementioned question of children owing something to their parents, then they'll have a stronger case when children are much older. It must be acknowledged up front that while children may not owe anything to their parents, they'll certainly be rightly classified as ungrateful if they fail to express at least some gratitude to their parents in return for their care. To begin, parents must provide for their children while they're young and unable to take care of themselves. This is readily apparent from the time they're born up until they reach early adulthood. 18 years of age is when a child legally becomes an adult, and parents technically no longer have to provide for them at this point. But this number can certainly be denoted as arbitrary. People can acquire jobs when they're still in their teens, 15, 16, even 14 years old in some cases, so they could theoretically start providing for themselves. However, as you likely postulated already, another dimension must be considered. Maturity. A person isn't going to be as mature at 16 compared to 18 and older. In some instances, the opposite might be true where they increase in ignorance and make worse mistakes as they grow older. For the vast majority of teenagers, though, they evidently must rely on their parents since they don't possess comparable life experience by virtue of their age. Thus, it seems that 18 isn't such an arbitrary number after all. If anything, it attempts to account for variance in maturity and granting a sufficient window where children can be protected from neglect. What we're also witnessing these days, with everything becoming increasingly unaffordable, is that parents are having to financially assist their children well into their 20s and 30s. Parents might not be obligated to do that, but it's certainly in their best interest because their children might end up supporting them after they retire. Anyhow, digressing from this point for a while, it's clear that parents owe their children and have obligations to them. They must provide the necessities of life, which fundamentally includes adequate access to sufficient food, water, clothing, and shelter. They must also attempt to keep them in decent health, and I acknowledge that what constitutes healthy is subjective to the individual. One final dimension, though slightly less imperative than the first two, is enabling the means towards a self-sufficient future. This is essentially done through schooling of some kind, whether that be public, private, or homeschooling. Education will give children a decent chance at navigating their way through life, along with constructing a basic foundation that they can choose to expand upon, if they wish. Alright, we understand that basic necessities must be provided, but do young children owe their parents anything in return? The short answer is no, because children don't have to take responsibility for themselves in a manner comparable to their parents. At least up until the mid-teens, parents have the sole responsibility for providing, and once a child matures, then that's a different story. In the meantime, while they're still young, they don't necessarily owe their parents respect, trust, obedience, and the like, though it's obviously in the child's best interest to do so. This is because they shouldn't bite the hand that feeds them, as their parents grant everything they need. It's also more probable that children will get at least some of what they desire if they're respectful, grateful, and obedient, because parents will be more inclined to grant their requests if they don't despise them. Especially involving luxuries, like playing sports and going on vacations, then gratitude should be expressed because not everyone is fortunate enough to have those experiences. Fundamentally, children can be ungrateful, distrustful, disrespectful, etc., and their parents would still have to provide for them. However, with that said, children who retain these characteristics into adulthood will find that nobody desires to be around them, including their own family. Hence, they'll become isolated and truly left to fend for themselves at that juncture. If young children don't necessarily owe their parents anything, then what about when they grow older? Well, when they become teenagers and young adults, then there's more of a case for children owing their parents a certain level of trust, respect, and obedience indeed, which varies from household to household. This notion is especially valid if parents have shown great love and respect to their children, in addition to being exceptional and refraining from any cruelty. Where parents have refused to provide the essentials for their children, inflicted cruelty and injustice, or have outright abandoned them, then I can agree that those children don't owe their parents anything. I wouldn't advocate for an eye course of action, like repaying their cruelty with more cruelty, but I wouldn't be hard-pressed to remark that these children don't owe their parents any kindness or courtesy in return. Phrased differently, it would be easy to understand why these children would be resentful towards their parents, and for good reason. One final remark on this notion is that it maintains an inherently subjective nature, as with many examples. If a child, teenager, or adult for that matter, is unhappy that they aren't getting their way all the time and acting like a spoiled brat, then I won't give any credence to their resentment. I'm thinking along more pragmatic lines, as in, if parents are providing a decent standard of living and opportunities for their children under the circumstances, then I don't believe their children have a legitimate case to be ungrateful and/or resentful. A quote I often recall concerning this subject remarks that you should, quote, "Forgive your parents when they couldn't give you more, because oftentimes it was all that they had." End quote. Remember that nobody is entitled to anything, except death. Count your blessings, because they can be taken away just as easily as they're granted. Furthermore, there's only so much time, money, and effort someone can grant under particular circumstances. For parents, the majority would like to give their children more, but reality often prevents that from happening. If your parents can forgive all of your shortcomings, mistakes, and BS, then why can't you forgive them for at least some of theirs? To conclude, children might not owe their parents anything, even as they grow into teenagers and adults, but that doesn't imply that they shouldn't express any respect, compassion, trust, and gratitude in return. In my life, I've certainly had disagreements with my parents about a plethora of topics over the years. As I've matured, I began to envision a particular future for myself which deviates to some extent from theirs. Like many teenagers and young adults, we're eager to forge our own path and take on the world. However, because we're still young, we also have so much to learn. Furthermore, we likely made errors where our parents had to bail us out or intervene in some fashion. We don't know everything, but we frequently think that we do, and this probably stems from the perceived invincibility during youth. Nothing can stop you, injure, or hurt you until you reach a place where you're beyond your element. I've had experiences like that, and I was humbled each time. Thus, while children might not owe anything to their parents, it's beneficial to heed at least some of their demands and guidance. When children are young, you can bet that their parents know better, as they've already been there and learned from it. Not in all cases, mind you, and not regarding everything, but since they've already been through their teens, for example, they can provide direction to help ease the journey. This is true even into young adulthood and beyond. Therefore, become your own person and construct a solid foundation, but rely on your parents while you still can. Additionally, even if it's only once, express some gratitude because they came to your rescue, loved you, provided for your needs, and raised you into the individual you are today. When they eventually pass away, you'll be what's left of their legacy, and only then will you truly realize how much of an impact they had on you. So, be sure to thank your parents while you still can, and before it's too late.